Coming soon from SJS Direct, Spellbound, a darker shade of black. Some people would think I have a hate for DC Comics by all the videos and blogs I write regarding that brand. However, I don't hate DC Comics. I really love comic books, I really love superheroes, and DC Comics a long time ago was a major part of my childhood. I grew up watching TV shows like Super Friends and the Superpowers show. I grew up collecting toy lines like the '89 Toy Biz Batman toy line, and I still collected action figures well into my adulthood, like your DC Universe classics. And I look at that brand and I see how great it was, and it's just saddening to me to see how lost and directionless the brand is right now as it relates to publishing and how it relates to film. When I look at the publishing division of your DC Comics, I see a brand that was once the one of the most storied brands in comic book publishing, now brought down to a level that is lower than some of the indies in terms of quality and in terms of product. When you look at the DC Comics product these days, and the publishing division, it's very jumbled, it's very directionless, and it's not on a level that it should be on. When you think of a brand like a DC Comics, you think of the greatest superheroes in American history. Literal icons. Your Superman, your Batman, your Robin, your Wonder Woman, your Green Lantern, the Flash. These are names that every kid pretty much knows by the time they're 10 years old. And sadly, I look at this brand, and when you look at the products in the comic shop, you can't recognize any of those characters at all, and that's because of the editorial and creative people don't really have a vision regarding those characters, and they're trying to make these characters be something that they're not. I mean, when it comes down to creativity with DC Comics, what I see in the comic division, publishing division, they're trying to make these characters be what I call real, and you can't make a fantasy character into a real person. It's just not possible. And when you try to apply storytelling approaches such as trying to make things more real in a fantasy world, it's just not going to work. As a guy who's been writing fantasy for over 15, 16 years, I understand that a fantasy world has to remain a fantasy world. Yes, it's absurd. Yes, it's ridiculous. But it has its own logic, and you have to respect that logic in order for the stories to work in a fantasy world. And one of the other big problems when it comes down to your DC Comics and time is Warner Brothers. And I see Warner Brothers as the parent company of DC Comics is its own worst enemy. In many cases, when it comes down to Warner Brothers, they often are so eager to make profits that they literally stumble over their own feet, and they wind up making products that are poor quality. And one of the poor products that they make are these poor DC Comics. But what's even worse than the poor quality DC Comics are the recent batch of superhero films, starting with that Man of Steel. Because when I look at their films, again, I see Warner Brothers executives getting in the way and meddling, and I see them tripping on over their own feet as they try to rush to compete with Marvel Studios instead of working towards creating a model that will help them launch films on a consistent basis. When you look at Marvel Studios, they spent at least a decade trying to refine their model before they launched that first Iron Man film back in 2008. They learned their hard lessons from films that failed, like the Hulk in 2003 and the declines in the Spider-Man franchise from Sam Raimi. So they said when they got the rights to their characters, what they wanted to do was create a functioning model that would enable them to be able to produce multiple films. And that's what they did. They spent their time working on a craft and a technique and a business model that would help them launch films in a concurrent basis. And because they did that, they were able to make, your Iron Man, your Captain America, your Incredible Hulk, your Thor, and they were able to build into the Avengers and then build into phase 2 and then into this phase 3, because they spent their time refining a model. And I wish Warner Brothers, instead of trying to rush films out, would instead just take a moratorium, take that hiatus, and just take a little time to refine the model. Because when I look at the way they are producing films, they are clearly rushing films out too quickly, and because they are rushing films out too quickly, the quality is poor. Because I look at the screenplays that they're producing, like your Man of Steel, which was really uninspired and flat, your Batman v Superman, which was just absolutely terrible. When you looked at the trailer, the dialogue was awkward and choppy. The acting was really stiff and forced. And I look at the other trailers for your films, like your Wonder Woman, which pretty much, yes, it has a lot of action. But the film really does not have a heart. It does not have a soul. And again, it does not have a direction. And then I look at other films, like your Justice League trailer, and that looks as bad as many of these 1970s blaxploitation films, which were pretty much made with a low budget and rushed out just to make money on black audiences. But that's what it looks like to me, because I looked at one of the frames from Justice League, and it reminded me not only of a blaxploitation film, but of those really terrible Tyler Perry movies. I remember that scene in the Justice League trailer from where Batman is trying to approach Aquaman, and it makes a big mistake that in screenwriting that no screenwriter would ever make who is seasoned. And that is, they were telling us about Aquaman instead of showing us Aquaman. Now, in this scene, he's in this fisherman's neighborhood wharf or whatever it is, and they're talking about Aquaman. They're saying how he brings fish to people, and he really helps, and he's some sort of legend, and he's in the room with them. But what the problem with that scene was is that they were telling us about Aquaman. And if you're a writer, you know what I'm talking about telling versus showing. Now, showing is about action. And if this guy's supposed to be Aquaman, we need to see him out in the ocean, standing up on a whale, giving Batman a look like, what do you want? That is a scene that's going to have impact on the viewer. Whereas the scene where he's sitting there talking and they're just telling, that's not telling me enough. That's not grabbing the viewer and telling us why I should care about Aquaman. When I see him in the ocean standing on that whale, that tells me why I should care about Aquaman. And that's the big problem with many of these DC Comics films, is that they tell us about the DC superheroes, whereas the Marvel Studios films show us what these Marvel heroes are about and what makes them great. And that's why the Marvel Studios films do so well at the box office, because they spend most of their time showing instead of telling, whereas your DC films tell us. Like when I look at Batman v Superman, again, does a lot of telling. It does a lot of telling us, oh, he's Superman, he's great, or he's Batman, and he's an urban legend. Now, we need to see these characters in action, just like we saw them in Paul Dini and Bruce Timm's the Batman-Superman movie, also known as World's Finest to those who watched the television show, Superman Animated Series, because it's on Superman the Animated Series DVD, and there we saw Superman and Batman in action. And this is one of the big problems that Warner Brothers has regarding its cinematic films, is that they talk too much, they tell too much, and we need to see it on the screen. And because they won't show it to the viewer on the screen, the viewer just doesn't care about DC superheroes. And the films, yes, they start out, really high, but then they fall really low. And this is the big problem production-wise, regarding your DC Comics films, is that they spend too much time telling, which is something you don't do as a writer, and they don't show. There's no visual to people, and because film is a visual business, and you have to show people what this character is about through their actions, and we don't see that. And when I looked at the Justice League trailer, again, I did not see that. With the Aquaman scene, I didn't see it, and the Flash scene, which was pretty awkward and forced, reminded me of something in Captain America Civil War. It was like a copy of that scene between Tony Stark and Peter Parker in Captain America Civil War, and you really don't want to do that cinematically. It's saying that you're not very creative, you're not very good at telling your own story, and that you can't tell your own story. That's the message Warner Brothers is really sending, is that they are trying to catch up they feel bad about themselves and they don't want to step up and improve the quality of their films. Because when they do this, they're saying that the DC cinematic universe is not strong enough to get its own audience, and that's the big problem with their films. That they're trying to compete instead of trying to create their own model. Because the way you really compete in business is not trying to copy the other guy. It is showing how great your product is. And the big problem with DC Comics comic books and DC Comics films is that they don't show us how great these characters are. The people who work in creative have a big problem in trying to show you what is solid about their characters. I mean, why should I watch Superman if you don't respect and value Superman's mythology and lore? Why should I watch a Superman movie if you don't respect and value Superman's mythology and lore? Why should I watch a Wonder Woman movie if you're not going to show me what's great about Wonder Woman? Why should I watch a Batman movie if you're not going to show me what's great about being Batman? When it comes down to Marvel Studios, I see what's great about Iron Man. I see what's great about Captain America. I see what's great about Thor. I see what's great even about Spider-Man and Captain America Civil War. They show us. But when it comes down to Warner Brothers, they are so much their own worst enemy, and they're so busy rushing that they wind up tripping over their own feet in their attempts to try to impress people with their product. And then sadly, because they rush their products out, they wind up becoming poor quality films that literally don't resonate with anyone and are literally ridiculed by everyone. And I really wouldn't want to see that happen, because the DC catalog is a great catalog of characters. They really can adapt the film, but again, that requires someone to take the time to create a model for that type of storytelling at Warner Brothers. But sadly, everybody's so busy rushing that they can't see that this is a process that you can't rush. It's something that you're just going to have to take your time to refine, and it was something any writer has to take the time to refine, because once you refine the techniques, then you can start producing quality films on a regular basis, and you won't have to deal with constant having to reboot franchises. When you take your time and just hash out all the issues and focus on trying to adapt the material in a way that captures the spirit of the material and the heart of the material, then you'll be able to tell stories regarding that material on a regular basis. I'm hoping that DC Comics and Warner Brothers get their game together, because they have a great catalog of characters and they have some great stories they could possibly adapt from those comics. I'm hoping that they can get themselves together and really start putting out some quality films, because I believe that they can compete on the same level as Marvel Studios, but it's just that they're too busy trying to rush and trying to make the fast dollar, instead of seeing this as a long-term game where they can pretty much catch up if they can pretty much produce 2 or 3 quality films and get the audiences to see what's great about DC Comics. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.